In this section of the course, we're going to continue our discussion about analysis model of the software design. Specifically, we're going to focus on dynamic behavior of objects. Our first handout for this section is called UML Sequence State and Activity Diagrams, but in this part, we're going to mainly focus on the discussion about sequence diagrams. So class diagrams provide a static view of our structure, but don't answer the question how exactly these objects are created and how exactly they call each other's methods. So the dynamic model in our software design is capable of showing us what objects and what messages are exchanged between the objects. Once again, the static model defines the structure, set of classes, which will then become objects at runtime. And we pretty much rely on the set of class diagrams and the specifications of our classes, specifying what are the responsibilities of classes, what are a set of data attributes, and what are the operations provided. So the next stage, the dynamic model, defines the behavior of the software in terms of objects cooperating. So in this section, we're going to focus specifically on sequence diagrams, and later we're going to speak about state diagrams and activity diagrams as well. The sequence diagrams really model the scenarios that we describe in our use case requirements. So the interaction of objects is placed in context of a specific use case scenario, therefore the sequence diagram is a primary tool to model the behavior of the system within the context of a specific use case. So this is an example of a sequence diagram, and in my demonstrations I would like to use sequence diagramming tool, which we mentioned earlier, part of our schedule when we introduce UML modeling language. There's a link to use sequence.zip. In fact, I am just about to download this tool. And save it right here. And so normally what is possible to do is just go ahead and rename this file as Java jar archive. So when you install Java on many systems, jar file extension is going to be understood as the Java archive, which is a runnable application using Java platform. So if you don't want to do this, you can, on the command line, you can use this command java jar sequence.zip. So I'll just try using it right now. Okay, so the sequence tool allows us to use the script down here to generate the diagram. And there is a set of examples that demonstrate simple sequence diagrams, so we can start with some of the examples. So here what it demonstrates, it basically shows us that there is one object, there is second object, there is third, and so forth, and so we can visualize how objects call each other methods using this tool. And this diagram, instead of being like drag and drop type of tool, using the script, it's a little bit like a programming language oriented tool, so that it allows us to generate this diagram based on the script. And so this makes it very, very dynamic, which is quite interesting type of facility to use. I have already put together the script to demonstrate our abstract factory for a visitor type of objects in the system. And I'd like to show you the script first. So there is a file with the extension C, because this sequence tool is very similar to the script is kind of similar to C programming language. I use the .c extension, and I can show you right here. So this is basically the idea is to demonstrate what happens here within our simulation scenario. And I'm going to open this location by going to sequence file, open, and specify this location and open this abstract factory visitor.c. So let's talk a little bit about the syntax that I'm using in this example and what it demonstrates. So as we discussed before, this is our class diagram right here. And so in this class diagram, we have the simulation scenario, which has a collection of visitors and also has a reference to the interface factory visitor. So right here, in general, the sequence diagram demonstrates that we have a system which is invoking a main method inside main app class. So this main app class represents the entire application. So right here, when we looked at our main app, this is the actual code. So we invoke, so the system invokes the static method main inside class main app. And what happens next is that we create new simulation scenario. So this is simulation scenario object across the top of this diagram. And we displayed that this is a constructor that's invoked. So basically from this point on, once we from within the main method right here, we execute constructor by using the new operator in our Java code, and this operator invokes this constructor. So part of this is also construction of the visitor shopper, which is also an object that the class name of which is shown at the top. But right here I'm not using the constructor. If I wanted to add the constructor of this, I can show you that perhaps you know, the expression inside the parentheses is evaluated before the rest of the statement outside of this parentheses. So it's very likely that what should be shown in the sequence diagram, if I wanted to display a creation of this visitor shopper, for instance, I could do it just like this and use the syntax, which I will go over with you just in a little bit, but I just want to show you what this does. Right, so right now what I just added to our sequence diagram is that I showed the execution of this constructor by adding it to my script. And I added it by using the name of the class, object of which I'm just about to create, and using constructor syntax in my script, using the parentheses just to show the constructor invocation right here. And this is the style that the sequence tool is using to create a body of this invocation bar or activation bar in the sequence diagram. So I just added this constructor to our script, and so I can switch to the script here and add it here. So this is basically an enlarged version of what I have down here in this sequence diagram tool. So I'll just resize it to show you the entire script. So it's this script that's already loaded into the tool. And so what happens next? Let's go back to the main class just to kind of try to trace through the steps shown here. The next thing is that once the scenario is constructed, okay, by the main method, because all of the things happening within the main method is shown within this activation bar inside the main method of the main app, right? So this is the main method inside the main app class. And so the next thing is to create visitors. So create visitors is an operation provided by our simulation scenario, right? So we've seen simulation scenario, it has create visitors. And we invoke this method from within our main. So this is where we go to call create visitors. And you can see that simulation scenario already has gotten its reference to the factory that constructs the visitors, and of course the type of factory that we've constructed was the factory for the shopper visitor. So there the sequence diagram shows that once we say create visitors, by the way, this operation belongs to simulation scenario, of course, right? So we call this, and in a loop here for the specified counter of visitors, we call visitors at factory create visitor. So we create visitor, we call this create visitor into the factory. So at runtime, of course, the call is dispatched to the factory visitor shopper, and we create visitors. What's not shown in this diagram that we have a loop, right? And so inside of our main method, we actually create as many as 100 of these visitors. So in this sequence diagram, I'm not showing that this is done 100 times. I'm just kind of reducing this diagram just to one call. And then in next step, what this main method does, it sets the new factory visitor emergency. Again, the creation of this visitor emergency is not shown, but if I wanted to show it, I can show you right here. So before I set a new factory, I can demonstrate that we create a new visitor emergency instance for the factory of this type. And just like we did with the factory for a shopper type of visitor, we can add this type of visitor here using the same syntax. So I'll show you in a little bit how the syntax works within the sequence tool. But for now, I just want to complete this demonstration. So before we call, just like we do in our main method, I'd like to insert the demonstration that we actually create the second type of the factory right here, and then we make another call to set factory to generate, to start using this new factory to generate the visitors. And so this is an updated diagram. So you can see that basically what the diagram displays is a set of facilities, set of objects across the top, and these objects begin to communicate, and we show the timeline which goes from top to bottom. And so within the sequence diagram, we have our first that we show is this main method, of course, which is driving the entire demonstration. And then from the main method, we start making calls. And here we're visualizing the call for construction of the objects. Here, 1, 2 objects are constructed. Then the method is invoked. Then another method is invoked. And you can trace through the actual calls. So the arrows indicate which object provides this method, and this is the place where it gets called. So for example, in this activation bar, what we have is that we call simulation scenario, and it provides create visitors operation. So we call create visitors. Create visitors is executing right here, and from here we call create visitor, which is delegated to factory visitor shopper. Of course, In order to be able to see something like this in the actual code, you have to go through different files to be able to visualize it. But in the sequence diagram, everything is sort of like gathered in one view